Christi here with Little Salty Homesteader. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about high intensity planting, what that is, and how you can incorporate it into your own growing spaces. High intensity planting, also known as high density planting or intensive gardening, is a garden method utilized to maximize your garden space to produce a larger harvest. And in the most simplest terms, it means throw away those typical plant spacing rules and utilize every inch of your garden bed. So when you buy plants at the nursery or packets of seeds, plant spacing is usually indicated on the label. So on this label, it's going to be right here in this general area. Typically, these spacing rules apply to large in-ground spaces tended by commercial farmers. However, most home gardeners don't typically have 40 to 60 foot garden rows with tons of growing space. For home gardeners like myself, spacing plants 3 to 4 foot apart simply will not be productive. For example, if I followed plant spacing rules for my okra, I would have half as many plants growing, which means half the harvest of one of my favorite crops. Planting guides state that seeds should be sown 18 inches apart in rows 4 foot from each other. That is the entire width of this individual raised bed, so that would mean that I would only be able to plant essentially one row of okra. But I have staggered seeds in rows much closer together to maximize how much okra I'm able to grow. So just to kind of point that out, even though the seedlings are still pretty small, I have okra here, and then I have a staggered row here, and then here as well, if the camera picks that up. So this row, they're still 18 inches apart here, but because they're staggered, these seedlings are actually about 9 inches apart. Planting intensely also provides benefits outside of bigger harvests. When you properly space plants with nothing planted between them, you're relieving bare soil. With bare soil comes the need for increased watering and the increased pressure for weeds to be able to grow within your growing spaces. Weeds love the sunlight that is available in those open spaces, and they will basically sprout anywhere they can take root. Planting the plants closer together reduces the amount of sunlight and wind exposure to soil, because the plant leaves essentially create a canopy over the soil, reducing the need for water and reduce the weed pressure that would be there if the soil was left open and all the sunlight and everything could just take over the entire space. So let me just kind of show you guys what I mean here with not leaving any bare soil. So in this bed, you can see that there's like 17 zillion plants growing. There's not really that many, but you can see that there's very little soil showing in between all of the different plants. So this is an intensely planted space, meaning that I have put as much in here as I could possibly fit without reducing the nutrient availability to each of the plants growing in here. So this is going to reduce the need for watering, because as these larger plants get bigger, they cast a shade over, and it's also going to reduce the ability for weeds to be able to germinate and grow and cause a problem and stealing all the nutrients for the other plants. Now, there are some limitations to high intensity planting that you do need to be aware of. So the first limitation is that this method is for raised bed gardening only. The extra depth provided by the raised beds is the key to having enough nutrient-rich soil to make high-intensity gardening possible. Second, high-intensity gardening requires a garden-present gardener. What that means is if you are going to be planting intensely, you need to be out here regularly, watering, pruning, fertilizing, harvesting, maintaining, trellising, doing all the different tasks that are required in order to propagate healthy plants and get them all the way through your harvest. This isn't a simply plant and neglect sort of situation, so you do need to be able to devote time to be out here in the garden tending to all of the plants that you have planted within your space. To get started with high intensity gardening or planting, the simplest thing to do is divide the provided spacing information in half. To return to my earlier okra example, instead of 18 inches apart, plant your okra seeds 9 inches apart instead. So that's exactly what it says on this packet, 18 inches apart for the okra. Divide it in half, you get double the plants planted in your growing space. Another way to implement high intensity planting is to utilize companion planting. Native Americans utilize the Three Sisters planting method to grow 3 crops in a single space. So the Native Americans would typically plant corn, squash, and beans together, and all of the plants would provide benefits to each other while still being able to grow to their own completion and feed the Native American tribes. The corn provided a vertical structure for beans to be able to climb on, and it also created shade for those tender bean leaves because they don't like to get too hot and they don't like to be scorched by the sun. The beans replenished the nitrogen in the soil as they completed their life cycle and died off, and then the squash would sprawl along the ground, which would then cool the soil temperatures that would keep the corn from overheating. So within your raised beds, you can do similar companion planting techniques. You can plant taller plants with shorter plants. The taller plants will then provide shade for those smaller ones. So as an example, here in this one, I have tomatoes planted along this back row, and as they grow, they're going to provide shade for the radishes that are also planted within them. Utilizing companion planting will also allow you to tuck in flowers, herbs, and varying vegetable crops. So again, returning to this raised bed that has so many different crops planted within it, in between each tomato plant and in between each pepper plant, there is some sort of flower or herb. So I have things like basil and marigolds and nasturtiums and calendula planted between all of those spaces, eliminating the empty soil, also providing other benefits to these plants like pest deterrent and increased flavor in the terms of basil acting as a companion plant. A third method for high intensity planting is to plant things that require no space between them, like lettuce. Now, if you want your lettuce to completely form its full mature, like if it's a head lettuce, you want it to reach its full mature size, you will need space in between them. However, if you like baby lettuce greens, this planting method is going to be great for you because you can simply just sprinkle your seeds in the soil and not worry about spacing. Come out and cut lettuce leaves off, return every few days to cut new leaves, and it takes up and it requires no space in between the seeds, but you're going to get a maximum return on your harvests. Now, this does not work for root crops like beets and carrots because those do require space in between each other in order to form those root vegetables that you're trying to harvest from them. Other methods for high intensity planting include vertical trellising for vining plants like your cucumbers and some of the vining bean varieties, which will leave garden space available for other crops, like in this bed that you can't really see from this angle. It has this trellis for cucumbers and some noodle beans and some melons, leaving space available for dill, bush squash varieties, some bush beans, my okra, sweet peppers, etc. You can also utilize square foot gardening, which is a method that divides your growing space into square foot sections, and then you plant your plants out within that square foot. And then succession planting, which I went over in a video earlier in the week if you wanted to check that out. Aside from raised beds, the only requirement for high intensity planting is nutrient-rich fertile soil. The soil is going to be the most important component in ensuring that you're able to maximize your harvest with all of these intensely planted crops. Ensure your beds have adequate nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which can be done through the performance of a soil test. It can be time consuming to test the soil in each individual bed. However, it will let you know what you need to amend with or if you need any amendments at all. In between crops, you can amend your spaces with nutrient-rich, well broken down compost. And while your plants are in the growing phases, you are going to want to apply fertilizer to your plants regularly. In my own garden, I alternate between liquid and granulated fertilizer. However, your fertilizer choices are completely up to you. With adequate soil nutrition, you should be able to maximize your food production with this high intensity planting method. If you garden using high intensity planting, please comment down below which of these tips and tricks has worked for you and how successful you have been with maximizing your harvest. If you are new to this planting method, I hope that you found this video helpful, and if you did find it helpful and you want to see more breakdowns of gardening, different gardening concepts, please like, subscribe, comment, do all those different YouTube-y things. Otherwise, until next time, go find a way to get those garden manicures. Bye!